Should Ray Davis or Ty Johnson be RB2? We're going to break that down and more today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Well, folks, welcome in. It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control our discussion. We have some great stuff to dive into today. Now, I did tell you that our next episode would be the All-22 review, and that was my full intention, and I will do the All-22 review whenever the All-22 tape is available. The Bills obviously played on Saturday afternoon. I refreshed all day Sunday. I got into the office at 4 a.m. on Monday. Tape was still not available. I emailed the NFL. I contacted the product lead for the film department, and hopefully we get that tape pretty soon here so I can get to work on it and get the All-22 review done like I normally do. So got to focus on what I can control, and that's what I can do. And so we're going to do Herd Mentality now, and hopefully our next conversation is the All-22 review, and the NFL will make the tape available like they're supposed to. All right, we'll start with this one from Alex, who says, is there any reason Ray Davis is seemingly locked into the RB2 role? I feel like every time I watch Ty Johnson play, he performs better than Davis. It's a good question here, but I don't think you should look at this as an RB2 or an RB3 label on Ty Johnson and Ray Davis. They fill different roles. It really just comes down to Ty Johnson being the best all-around passing down back, and you want to preserve him for those moments. They're both going to play 20 to 30% of the snaps on a weekly basis. It's not like a backup quarterback or a backup offensive lineman where, hey, if the starter's not in, this is the second guy in, this is the third guy in. It's situation specific. And so they're both going to have a role. They're both going to have a part to play in this offense, but it's not necessarily a defined pecking order. It's situation dependent. So I think of James Cook as the primary back, and then you have roles behind him for Davis and Johnson that account for 20 to 30% of the snaps on any given week. Next one comes from Steve. Steve says, about a year ago, Greg Cosell made an observation on One Bills Live. Teams that pass the ball 45 to 50 times per game cannot expect an offensive line unit to sufficiently pass protect. Even if some of today's pass plays are bubbles and screens, defensive players are way too athletic. That said, I believe it underscores the need for a competent running game. The Bills seem to be a poster child for a balanced offensive approach, and I think most playoff teams fit that mold. With many teams playing a 4-2-5, running the ball makes sense. But I think there's more in play here. Not the demise of the pass, certainly not, but a more league-wide emphasis on running the ball, which we are beginning to see. I, for one, would be okay with the Bills passing no more than 22 to 26 times per game, perhaps at the statistical expense of Josh Allen, not to mention fantasy dynamics. Additionally, will the pistol aid in the emphasis to run the ball? It's a lot to unpack here. First of all, the pistol should help you run the ball more. It's a formation that leads to those opportunities. But I don't know that it tells the story of what your narrative within the question gets into. I think the Bills already say that they agree with you in some regards. Last year, the Bills were 28th in percentage of offensive plays that were passes They were 5th in percentage of plays that were runs. Now, I'm not aligned with you to put a cap on the amount of passing plays. I don't think you go into any game thinking, yeah, let's throw it no more than 25, 26 times. I think every game is different, and your goal offensively should be to attack a defense where it's most vulnerable and score as many points as possible. Sometimes that's going to be a pass-aggressive approach. Sometimes it's going to be more run-oriented. And obviously, game scripts matter a ton in your pass-run distribution. But it ultimately comes down to this central idea. It's about the threat of your offense being two-dimensional. Every offense will be hardest to defend when it's two-dimensional. And so maybe there's games where you're going to throw it more or you're going to run it more. But the fact that you can do either is what's most important. That's what's going to make you the most difficult to defend because the predictability is less. And the most dynamic thing that you do is throw the ball with Josh Allen. Those are your best offensive plays. You certainly want to do those the most. But ultimately, it's understanding your opponent. It's being two-dimensional. And it's playing out the game. And whatever the game script calls for, doing that thing, which will give you the best chance to win the football game. So I agree with the emphasis on running the ball and the balanced approach. I don't like the idea of capping or looking for ranges of specific plays. Attack the defense the best way that you can. Score as many points as possible. Let the game script play out. And preserve your ability to be two-dimensional because that's going to make your offense the most difficult to defend. All right, coming up next, James has some criticism for the new kickoff stuff, and we got a whole lot more to get into, including practice squad rules, Josh Allen's accuracy, a whole lot to do. Folks, be sure to stick with us. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. Fantasy football is back. Fire up the group chat, get your draft board ready, and buckle up for a season filled with breakouts, busts, and all the overreactions we live for. It's all going down on Yahoo Fantasy. This year I'm playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran that's making your millionth league. I've used Yahoo Fantasy for years, and I love how smooth the draft day experience is. The mobile app is awesome. It's easy to set up a league, and the smack talk hits just a little different in those message boards. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now is the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. Welcome back, folks. The next one comes from James. James has a two-part question. The first one is, I think the NFL has completely ruined the kickoff. The whole setup looks silly with how they line up, and now they start at the 35-yard line with a touchback. Can we give the offense any more advantages? Hope the league realizes how they're ruining the game and swings back to normal. All right, so let's talk about it. Swinging back to normal means that you always get a touchback. That's what the NFL went to. The touchback was at the 20, and you had the normal full field kick play. Teams just did a touchback every single time. And kick returns were completely phased out of the game. The NFL wants kick returns back. They want them to be more watchable, and they want it to be a safer play. And I think they've accomplished that. The setup piece, that doesn't really bother me. It's just something that we have to get used to. It's a safer play. Whether we like it or not, it's a safer play. You no longer have these unbelievably big, physical, athletic dudes running full speed for 50 yards and colliding into each other. It's a much more condensed play. Here's what it comes down to. Cover the kick. Make a tackle. You don't have to give teams the 35-yard line. Be good at covering kicks. Figure it out. Play within the rules. So, yeah, I think going back to normal means just put the ball at the 20. That's what you're saying. Put the ball at the 20 and start playing. If you don't like that idea, well, then I think we've got a reasonable path. And it's going to come down to, can you cover kicks? Because you don't have to give them the 35. And that's why I took exception with what KJ Hamler did. He had an opportunity to take a knee and give the Bills offense the ball at the 35. He returned the ball and only got to the 20. It's a 15-yard loss. Have a good returner if you want to be good at it. Be good at blocking. Be good at covering the kick. Because going back to normal means just put the ball at the 20. So hopefully there's some compromise within that. The other part of James's question is, am I the only one concerned about how many first downs the Giants got on third down and long? Correct me if I'm wrong, but this was the Achilles heel of the Bills' defense last year. We just played dime and let them grab massive yards for first downs. That's not true. The Bills did not just play dime and let them grab massive first downs. It was a problem last year. Yes, for sure. And I would have loved in that preseason game against the Giants for the Bills' third down defense to be better than it was. I'll say this. The Bills are aware of the problem they had last year. And this preseason game against the Giants that lacks any game planning is not a meaningful data point to provide a sound indicator of what the third down defense is going to look like in 2025. I know that we have the urgency to go to that place, but it's just not, it's not sound logic to put yourself in a position where you're going to be panicking over the third down defense. Let the actual third down defense do what it's going to do, and then we can go from there. But again, with no game planning, with both of your safeties out, with your Mike linebacker out, it's not a good way to measure or forecast how good the Bills' third down defense is going to be. I understand how your mind can take you there. I even said it. I felt like I was watching the 2024 Bills defense at times against the Giants. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge that it's not a useful data point to be an indicator or predictive of what the Bills' third down defense will be this year. Bob says, please comment on the retention of players on the practice squad. I understand non-veterans must go on waivers, but I believe teams can only protect a very limited number of players once on the practice squad. I understand the CBA forces the ability of teams to pluck players if they go on the 53. It just feels unfair for a team like the Bills, who develop players only to have them at risk to be stolen by other teams. While teams can stash some players on IR, there is no avoiding the exposure to losing drafted talent. Well, yeah, it's part of the deal of being a really good team with a deep roster. If you want to be able to keep all your rookies, you're going to love what's going to happen with teams like the Jets and the Patriots and the Browns and teams that aren't going anywhere. When you have a good roster, it's hard to keep those bottom-tier developmental players. That's just the reality of it. You'd rather it be that than, oh, man, we can roster 12, 14 rookies because we don't have any other good players. So let's accept that as a good consequence to where the Bills roster is at. But let's talk about the practice squad rules. First of all, there are no more protected practice squad players. You cannot protect practice squad players. In the COVID year and maybe like the year after, you could say, hey, these two players, nobody else can sign. You would pick those on a weekly basis. That is no longer a thing. So you have a 16-man practice squad. The Bills and every team can have 17 if one of them is an international pathway program player, which the Bills have in Travis Clayton. So the Bills, assuming Travis Clayton is on the practice squad, will have 17 players on the practice squad. Of those players, up to 6 can be veteran players, meaning 2 or more accrued NFL seasons. What is an accrued NFL season? It means that a player played in at least 6 regular season games that year. So once you're on the practice squad, you can be elevated to the active roster 3 times per year until the playoffs. After the third elevation, the player either has to stay on the active roster or go back on the practice squad, and they cannot be called up again. Players in terms of getting players back on the practice squad after you release them. So the Bills will release all these players, and you're going to want to get them back on the practice squad. players with less than 4 accrued seasons are subject to waivers when they're released, and then other teams can claim them and sign them to their active roster. And of course, there's a waiver priority. And from the day after the Super Bowl until the end of week 3, the waiver priority order is the prior season standings, so the draft order from the previous year. And then if a player has more than 4 accrued seasons, they're not subject to waivers, so they can go straight to the practice squad if that's what they're willing to do. So hopefully that was a good primer for what's coming here in the next few weeks with players that are going to be released and waived, and which ones have to clear waivers, which ones don't, what the composition of the practice squad can look like. I hope that brings clarity because I know there's going to be a lot of questions about that in the coming weeks. Jeff says, was wondering if you could compare the accuracy you saw from Josh Allen in this year's camp compared to last. I know you mentioned that Josh had looked spectacular last year, which may have been a clue to the issues on defense. This camp seems more balanced, with many edges of the day going to defense. Thank you, and go Bills. I'll say this. I thought Josh Allen's accuracy in the 5 practices I watched was excellent. I thought it was last year too. And I think what it comes down to is this. It's not that Josh Allen is better or worse than he was last year. It's that the defense has actually improved. So it's no longer every single day Josh Allen's lighting them up. There's a little bit more back and forth, and the defense is having some days where they're winning the day. And I think it tells a better story of this team and what it's capable of, where we do look back to last year, and it was an indicator that the Bills were going to have some struggles on defense. Also, that Josh Allen was going to be really good on offense, right? That's something we can't forget there. Where this year, Josh Allen still looks really good, but there's more resistance, which I think is a good thing for kind of forecasting where this defense is going to be in 2025. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about Jackson Haw's. We'll talk about that, why I keep calling him Spencer as well. On the other side of it, we'll talk about 5-man pressures and more. So, folks, be sure to stick with me. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets easier and faster than ever before. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you could save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. Ever wonder what your view will actually look like before you buy? The app shows you a panoramic seat view, so there are no surprises. And speaking of no surprises, with Gametime, the price you see is the price you pay. No hidden fees. So take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, we gotta address this because I keep calling Jackson Haw's Spencer Haw's, whether it's on this podcast or even during the game against the Giants. I do the in-game text to our subtext community, which I hope that you'll become part of. There's a link in today's show notes to be part of it. And I typed Spencer Haw's, and I got to tell you why I keep doing this, because it's silly, and I got to get this figured out. I used to love fantasy basketball. Loved it. It's probably my favorite form of fantasy sports. Now, I've drifted away pretty much from following any sport that's not the NFL. I don't have the bandwidth, and I'm so dialed in on what's going on in the NFL that I don't have time to keep up with baseball and basketball like I once did. But I loved fantasy basketball, and I was in rotisserie leagues. And in rotisserie leagues, you want to have players at positions that do the thing that you need them to do at that position, but can also do other things. So Spencer Hawes, right? Spencer Hawes was this center that I would always have on my fantasy team because he was a center that got points and rebounds, but he was pretty good at blocks, and he also hit some three-pointers, which 15 years ago when I was heavy into fantasy basketball, big guys that hit threes were pretty rare. I know that's more of a thing now. And so I would always want to have Spencer Hawes as like this guy in my back pocket. And the Bills got Jackson Hawes, and I keep calling him Spencer Hawes. And hopefully me having this moment, admitting the problem, will lead to me no longer calling Jackson Haw Spencer Haw. So I'm sorry about it. I don't want to do it. I'm admitting the problem. That's why it's here. And I'm going to work as hard as I can to start calling this man by the name his parents gave him. So this next question is about Jackson Haws from Brian, who says, can you explain the scheme subtleties of having Jackson Haws in the lineup versus a jumbo type set with an additional offensive lineman like Alec Anderson? I would assume it's to stress the defense into making a decision between coverage or bringing people into the box and then the take of the personnel mismatch. But I would think that it would require the offensive game plan to have Haws demonstrate his pass catching abilities first in order to maximize the potential. So here's the thing, and I feel like there's a lot of conversation and thoughts right now about how the sixth offensive lineman works with the arrival of Jackson Haws, who's a very good blocking tight end. They're both going to be a thing. They're both going to be a thing for this Bills offense. In terms of the specific question about scheme subtleties, Jackson Haws, I've got a problem. I got to get this figured out. Jackson Haws, as a high-quality blocking tight end, is going to bring more athleticism as a blocker, so more range. So if you want to have these guys get out in space, if you want to have them wham block and maybe do some longer pulls, you're going to have more at your disposal with Haws in the blocking capacity in terms of wanting more range. And you have more of a pass-catching threat, so it's more for the defense to account for. Of course, Haws needs to prove his pass-catching prowess, but even if he's a below-average pass-catching tight end, that's going to be better than an above-average pass-catching offensive lineman. So more threat of a pass, more range as a blocker. With the sixth offensive lineman, you're going to have more power at the point of attack. You'll have less range, you'll have less pass-catching ability, but your capacity to move bodies at the line of scrimmage is going to be better with a sixth offensive lineman than even a high-quality blocking tight end. The Bills are going to use both. And so that would be the subtleties of what would make either more effective. James says there is talk of Buffalo's defense bringing more pressure with five-man fronts. What exactly does that look like? Are we using a third linebacker to rush? Are we still playing nickel and or dime and rushing a defensive back? I'm excited to hear we are exuding more pressure with our new defensive personnel. Just curious how they're going to do it. Great question. So let's start here. Five-man fronts are not necessarily the same thing as a five-man pressure. Five-man front usually means that you're going to walk down a linebacker onto the line of scrimmage. Five-man pressure just means that you're rushing five players. And you can run a five-man pressure using any personnel grouping. And you could do it in a variety of ways. You can rush your four-down lineman plus a linebacker, your four-down lineman plus a defensive back. You can rush three-down linemen. You can drop one and drop two second-level players, whether that's linebacker or defensive back. So it's all about just five different players as opposed to a four-man organic rush. You're sending five, and they could be any combination of players. So that's the whole point. You're sending more in your rush. Now, of course, there's a trade-off with that. That means you have one less player in coverage. But the idea of rushing five is that you're going to set up a lot of one-on-ones, right? So five-man pressure, we're going to get a lot of one-on-one opportunities with our rushers against their blockers, which is what you want. And then through that, because you have so many players that you're sending, you're going to challenge the communication of that offensive line, and that could get you a free runner at the quarterback. So that's the benefit. And, of course, the risk is that you have one less player to space the field in coverage. So hopefully you can heat up some throws and lead to bad decisions and get some negative plays, but there's a risk-reward with that as well. Koala says this: is it normal for defensive coaches and coordinators to be more aggressive, loud, and shouty to players during training camp than the offensive coaches and coordinators? Watching Hard Knocks made me think Bobby Babich is a different kind of guy. Yes, 100%. This has been my experience always, where the defensive coaches and coordinators are just wired a little bit different. Think about offense. Offense is organized. You got 11 guys working together to run a play, right? They all know where the ball is going to go, what the intent of the play is. Defense is not that. Defense is reactionary, and those guys are wired a little bit differently. You got to be willing to not know what the other team's going to do. You have to be able to play off blocks, make tackles, chase people around. It's just different. It's just different. I think because of that, you have a different mindset of people that are defensive-oriented and offensive-oriented. Now, it's not always going to be the case. I don't think that Sean McDermott's probably a shouty type defensive coordinator, right? He's going to have a different feel, but Bobby Babich, Rex Ryan, these guys have a different type of mindset and approach. And I think you have to, like, defense, you got to be a dog. And I'm not saying that you can't be offensively. Offensively, you got to have a mindset and all of that. It's important. But defensively, it's just a little bit different because of how reactionary it is. And then you're playing through adversity. You're playing through obstacles every single play to achieve your goal, where offensively it's all organized and we're trying to do this together. Defensively, it's like, boy, I got to run through some dude. They're trying to block me. I got to get them off me. I got to tackle a dude that doesn't want me to tackle him. And you got to have a different type of mindset to be able to be great at that. Again, I'm not being critical of offensive players, but a little different. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today. I certainly hope our next conversation is going to be the All-22 review. I'm going to sit in my office the rest of the day. I got other stuff to do. I got other videos to make, other podcasts, but I'm going to be refreshing that All-22 file and hoping that the Bills-Giants will be in there soon. In fact, of all the preseason games from last week, the only ones as of Monday morning at 4 a.m. that were not in there were the 2 games that were played on Sunday and Bills-Giants from Saturday. So it's got to be in there soon. I'm chomping at the bit. I want to watch the tape. I want to do the podcast. I want to send the All-22 film clips to our Subtext and our Substack subscribers. Again, there's a link in today's show notes to be part of that. And hopefully that's our next conversation. But if not, we'll talk Bills again for you here tomorrow. So don't miss it. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you take a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. Look forward to catching up with you again real soon.